Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, as a quick thing, please introduce yourself and what you do.
I'm Sammy Popat. I am the Innovation and Ecosystem Catalyst for the University of Maryland College Park within the Division of Research, specifically within the Office of Innovation. And my role, just to give you some context, is to think about how the many partners, many resources and programs across the campus and even in the community are connected and aligned, and to some extent are able to support the broader network of students, faculty, and alumni and community who engage the university for support around innovation, entrepreneurship, and economic impact. And to that extent, I act or operate in the concierge. So if you need a one point of contact, start with me, and I help to get you to where you need to go.
Fantastic. And that actually gets into our first question, which is how did you get into this role?
Ooh. So, as I recall, you had your first interview with my boss, Dean Chang. And so the story goes back to 2016 when I was actually working with Dean in the Academy for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We were working on a project for the NSF I-Corps. And if for those of you who are in the startup world know customer discovery, even internally at the university, we were doing customer discovery. But we were doing customer discovery for the I-Corps program from the standpoint that we already knew a lot of the faculty and staff who were innovative and entrepreneurial, specifically through the STEM programs, computer science, engineering, information science. But we weren't necessarily sure if we were really inclusive and we were engaging enough partners across the campus who saw themselves in that sort of, you know, umbrella of innovation and entrepreneurship, because it is in some ways language that sometimes is particular to people who are in a engineering side or computer science side. But in our perspective, if you are a maker, a creator, a builder, a writer, an artist, you are an innovator. You are someone who is contributing to society and providing impact. But sometimes that language doesn't make you feel like you're part of that tent. And so the customer discovery was, why don't we go talk to faculty who are within different departments in schools and colleges? And I spent several months going to places like agriculture and our architecture school and even journalism. And what was crazy was there were, and not to be unexpected, were faculty who were doing really cool projects. And so in that time frame when I was working on this contract with the academy and doing customer discovery, the university was also hiring its first ever chief innovation officer. And this was the first time the institution had prioritized having someone dedicated to really thinking about how the university's resources and programs are under one umbrella, still autonomous, still kind of reporting up to their deans and schools and colleges, but also having a larger mandate to collect data points to understand how are we having an impact, but also how can we work better together and how can we scale and amplify all the resources, programs, and opportunities we have for our students, faculty, and alumni. It happens that Dean Chang was on that search committee. He thought, you know what, this person that we are bringing onto this campus doesn't have the same institutional knowledge that someone like Sammy does. Not only was I a student here, I'd also worked here in a professional capacity up to that point for about 11 years or 10 years. And Dean's like, you know what? I think you could be a really good person for, and her name is Julie Lenzer, to get to know. And maybe she might see some value in having you help her get acclimated to campus. And so that was back in 2016. And around 2017, she brought me on and hired me. And she said, come up with a title and a role. And at that time, I served as the campus connector because I really felt that my role was to connect more parts of the campus together and more parts of the community back into the campus as well. And I had that title for about 5 years, and Julie left. And lo and behold, who's my new boss? Dean Chang. So Dean and I were having a conversation, and he said, I think there's an opportunity for us to really formalize what you do in a way that maybe speaks to the broader impact of our community, but also helps to formalize the community as this program, which is an ecosystem, right? We are this incredibly large institution, 12 schools and colleges, 41,000 students, 10 to 11,000 faculty staff, all doing incredible things. And yet in the innovation entrepreneurship side, we don't have that recognition. We aren't really known in that way. But if we formalize this and create some language around it, people will start to feel themselves as part of this community. And so, yeah, I'm a community catalyst, but from the standpoint of the language is an ecosystem. And so that's kind of how I got into this role. That's what I've been doing. And over the years, we've had, Quantum Startup Foundry launch. So, here I am having this conversation with a program that wasn't yet manifested, but thanks to IonQ and the success we've had around quantum, and then this burgeoning community of startups, and recognizing we have a need to actually support these quantum related initiatives. Hey, not only do we have now a Capital of Quantum initiative, but before that, we had the Quantum Startup Foundry, the Quantum Investment Summit. And you know what? Someone like me can also, when someone comes to me about questions about quantum, I don't know everything, but I do know the people who do know things. I can you can connect to Winnie and Antoinette and Piot. So lots of great faculty, staff, and colleagues across campus. And like I said, as a concierge, help to get them to where they need to go.
Yes, I remember first starting working here, and Antonella was like, "Oh yes, Sammy's like one of the first people that you need to connect with because he just knows everybody." And I feel like this is one of the things that we first connected over, which is like both of our jobs to a certain degree is about connecting the ecosystem. Yours is probably the broader University of Maryland versus mine is like just quantum focused. But regardless, like we're the ones who like direct people to where they need to be eventually. I know this answer to your question, or I know exactly who knows the answers to your questions.
And I think there's a value to that. And from my perspective, being someone who was a student here and has been in professional capacity here from the staff side, and even done a little teaching and coaching and mentoring, and then even being involved as an alum, whether in a board relationship or others. I know how disparate this campus is, and to the extent that institutionally it is a hard place to wrangle, and no matter what your point of interest is, there are so many different ways to get in the door, and yet it can be very overwhelming and daunting. And at some point, it may just be too challenging for one to kind of pursue. But to know that there are people here in your capacity, in my capacity, who were in some ways customer service representatives. Like if we can make the university an easier place for you to access, we're hopeful that you'll find what you need and that the good things that you want to do can actually be manifested. And we also want to be, in my opinion, we are a state institution, so we are funded by the state to do good work for the state. And if we are able to help make those activities more accessible and also to ensure that people get to where they need to go, the faster to accelerate those processes, the more good we can create. And so that's the way that we both look at it. It's sometimes underappreciated. And so I recognize that, someone like you does a lot of good things, and yet not everything you do can be measured. And so it's always nice to have a conversation with someone who understands, even on my side of the broader perspective. There's a lot of things happening, and not all of it leads to something, but all of it is to make, hopefully this a better, easier, nicer space and place to be working.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. So, transitioning into the second question, which is if you had to teach a class on one thing, what would you teach?
Yeah, so I put a lot of time into this thought because I've done some teaching. And, I think one of the places where I really get a lot of joy when it comes to teaching is providing real world experiences and examples to anyone who, is in conversation with me. So, I don't think of just teaching a course. I think of just in conversation because I work with a multitude of people. And so I engage a lot of individuals who come to me about questions regarding entrepreneurship and innovation and just how to start a company and how to find funding. And all of these questions to me are about imparting knowledge. And so what I've seen in my role that's really helpful is to have stories, and to have stories that people can really resonate with, that they can almost touch, right? It's so palpable that it really resonates with them. And I think of when you have stories that are close to home. So obviously, being at the University of Maryland, we've got some great companies that have come through the university, great founders who've started their ventures here, and also people who've also had failures, right? And also challenges and times when things didn't go well. So my course, if I were to teach one, would be those case studies of failure, of success, of pivoting, and also the importance of really doing the fundamentals, the customer discovery, getting to know your competitors, getting to know the channels and the markets, but also how things can change quickly. I mean, in this current environment where we're talking about maybe the economy or geopolitical situations. And so being an entrepreneur, being an innovator, being someone who's trying to be a catalyst for change, you also have to understand there are many variables. And to that extent, the more that you have stories, you have examples, you have case studies, and that you can lean on them for at least imparting some wisdom that helps you to make a decision faster, that's the kind of course that I'd want to teach. And hopefully, with that knowledge, others will find that they can also do that on their own as you listen to podcasts, right? how you made it or how I made it, or other podcasts where they do a lot of these conversations. There's a lot of knowledge that is imparted through those conversations, and people may not realize that. And so you don't have to have a course for that, but it sometimes helps to be able to have people in that course asking questions and learning from those questions that are being asked. And like, why did that person make that decision? What happened there? What would you have done differently? What would I have done if I were in that position? So I do like the aspect of not just sharing knowledge, but also having that knowledge kind of through the questioning and the dialogue that can kind of stem from, ooh, did not see that one coming.
I think this is definitely entrepreneurship based course that would be really suitable for the UMD ecosystem and just all startups in general. Because like you said, I'm like, as you were talking through it, I was like, oh yeah, I feel like a few of our quantum startups would do really well in like taking this course and hearing these stories and kind of not necessarily accepting failure, but being okay if there are any like setbacks or if there is any like points and times throughout their process where they do fail.
And you bring up a good point in terms of the word failure, right? In the mindset of an innovator, entrepreneur, what have you, those are learning moments. And so failure has sometimes such a negative connotation to it because we, especially in this culture, don't like to celebrate failure. We don't like to think of ourselves as making a mistake, doing something wrong. And to that extent, being an entrepreneur is continuous failure, but it's learning from, it's becoming resilient to, it's mitigating risk. And the more that you have those opportunities, whether to learn from others or in your own experience to kind of internalize, this is part of the process. This is part of the journey. No one has all the answers. No one knows the right thing to do at all times. And they talk about preparation leads to success. It really does come down to doing the fundamentals, mitigating the risk, having a good team around you, and then being able to make the best decision that you can with the information you have at hand. And unfortunately, even when those things are all aligned, you can still make the wrong decision or the least best decision at that moment. But you go forward and you continue to pursue, and hopefully things work out eventually. But yeah, I always like to encourage people not to get too lost in the idea of failure or in not having ultimate success, because you are always trying to achieve and aspire to the next milestone and becoming the better version of yourself and the company becoming the best version of itself.
And I think like there's this huge thing of like to the road to success isn't just like failure and success. It's like failure after failure after failure, and eventually maybe you'll reach success. But like the stories that I always like think about is like KFC, where KFC was like he was an entrepreneur. He ran many, many businesses and they all kind of went bankrupt or failed. And he was like on the brink of like not wanting to live. And he's like, you know what? I'm gonna throw this like one last community party before I leave this world. And it was at that party that people were like, have you ever thought about selling this chicken? And then bam, KFC like became a thing and he was like 50 or 60 at that time after so many like entrepreneurial like failures. And same thing for like as much as I don't like Edison as a scientist, but like the story of how he like came to the light bulb filament, right? And he tested like 900 different compounds or substances until he found. But the point is, he went through so many different chemicals, and so imagine if he was just like two chemicals away from the final thing that would have created the light bulb. And I do kind of appreciate that this current generation, there is this thing of like, if you were like 10 failures away from success, how quickly would you want to fail? And there's kind of this new idea around like failure isn't a bad thing, right? Failure is just one step of the process or the road to where you eventually need to be.
You just illustrated exactly what I was talking about, right? You gave me the case in point of KFC, the Kentucky Fried Chicken founder, who, after many, 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 many failed attempts at getting someone to buy, his bucket of chicken and to invest in creating some sort of restaurant and eventually franchising it, it was the continuous belief in himself and the product that he was selling that ultimately led him to success. But it was getting okay with the rejection, right? Someone may not see the value in what you're providing, maybe because it's not the right product at the right time. Maybe it's not a right product or right fit for them. And so it is incredible how much fortitude needs to be developed and this sense of, self-confidence and belief in what you're doing, but also recognizing you have to be an active listener. Are you asking the right questions? Are people hearing what you're sharing? And something like chicken, you're like, Kentucky Fried Chicken. What makes it so special? But here we are talking about KFC. We're talking about this brand that still exists after many, many decades, and a founder whose vision has come to fruition, and who probably never imagined his chicken would be sold in China, right? Or his product would be as beloved as it could be. But point being, yes, those stories are really what resonate with what leave people when they leave, any course or instruction. it sticks with them because hopefully they're going, why isn't my product working? Why isn't this working? Oh, you know what? Maybe I'm not selling it in the right way. Maybe I'm not pitching it. Maybe I don't understand what the actual customer need is. That thinking that goes behind it and that process is what lets you to get to where you need to go. But it takes that time and effort and that intentionality of pursuing something. Um, and sometimes you're feeling like you're an uphill battle, but maybe it's just a test to see if you have what it takes to get you to the next step.
So, next question is, what is your go-to present when you don't know what to get someone?
So I am a big reader, and I have found that there's always a book for every occasion, and there's a book for everyone out there. It doesn't have to be a long novel. It doesn't have to be something that is droll. It doesn't have to be something that's academic. I'm big into poetry and science fiction, short stories. So depending on the person, depending on his, her, their interest and passions, and especially in the world of innovation and entrepreneurship, there is a ton of content out there, but I actually lean into especially science fiction. For innovators, entrepreneurs, there's a lot to be said about thinking about the future and seeing how other people from the 50s and 60s and even more recently in the 90s and 2000s envision the world that we would be in, and then to compare and contrast to like what are the technologies and the advancements that they foresaw, how close are we. For those who don't want to read, there's also I would suggest some of the science fiction genre media. So whether it's Star Trek, and some of the the outshots of what Star Trek has created. There's a lot to be said about that content that helps you think about like Star Trek, the original, with the communicator, right? And the phaser and the replicator, and then Star Trek Next Generation with the holodeck. So there is a lot to be learned from consuming content that has had a lot of thought behind it in terms of the world that we live in. And hopefully those internal dialogues, when people are reading it, are like, how did that come to be? Why did that person see that as a possibility? Where do I see myself in this world? How would I create my product so that's meeting a future need because we know the world is headed in that direction? So that's kind of where I would go is a good book. Plus, I always find that helping people to make time for themselves is another good thing that, it's the present in itself. It's just time. So be present with what you're doing. And sometimes when, if I give someone a book that's a short story or collection of short stories or science fiction, it helps them to remove themselves from the work that they're currently doing and let their mind take, a second to kind of readjust. And hopefully that in itself enables them to have better thoughts and help them push their ideas forward, without realizing that's what, was unintentionally, intentionally placed into that effort.
I think I always appreciate a good book, and so I thought that was a wonderful answer. What's a piece of work advice you'd give your younger self?
Ooh, very easy for me to say is be patient. I am someone who wants to make things happen. I believe things should happen quickly. If I see something that isn't right, isn't working, isn't efficient, I just want to get it at it and take care of it and fix it. I've realized working in an institution as large as the University of Maryland, yes, you have bureaucracy, and those are, that system is in place for reasons. But to be patient is also to understand that you need to develop relationships with people, and you have to understand why certain things are in place, processes, systems, checks and balances, and to that effect, also, if you can develop those relationships, develop that trust, ultimately, when you have an idea, or even if you have a potential solution that you can present, people are more willing and receptive to them. When you're younger, there's a sense, at least in my opinion, that it wasn't that I knew everything, but I could see it with my eyes. And so my eyes, my perspective, where I was coming from, had a really good, belief system that it needed to be fixed, it needed to be rectified, and why wasn't it? Um, and part of it is there are many other problems than just the one that I see. So sometimes you have to take into consideration all the other places that need to be addressed before that one thing that you really want to have addressed is fixed, or has some sort of solution. So yeah, I always tell myself, and I would tell a younger version of myself and anyone else, be patient. That doesn't mean to take your foot off, you know, the gas pedal. It just means coast a little bit, get some people to buy into what you're doing, and learn more about why what's happening is what's happening, and then see yourself through to the point where maybe what you present is something that is able to be applied. The other thing is, because you're patient, in time you get perspective. You earn a sense of understanding of all the ways that things are interconnected. And sometimes it's not easy just to fix one thing because there will be other problems and consequences that pop up. But you don't have that perspective when you come in, you see things and you realize, I could do this really quickly and make your life better. Not everybody also wants things to be better. Not everybody needs things to be faster. Um, and I am, as I've aged, become a proponent of being more thoughtful about the fact that, we don't always have to have growth or progress as quickly. We need to be more intentional about appreciating what we have, but also understanding what is necessary now, what is better for later, what do we do to get to where we want to go. And especially, at a university context, you can go fast alone, or you can go, and that's true in all settings. You can go slower, but you can have more people come with you along that journey, and collectively you can do greater good.
Yeah, I think I'm still in my first year of being at the university, so I've definitely been in the part of like, why is it the way that this is? Why can't we make this process a little bit quicker? Why don't you just let me do it and I can make it a little bit quicker? But at the same time, there are definitely times where I'm like, there must have been something that happened that made the system the way that it is right now. There's this battle between wanting to get things done efficiently and quickly versus like safely and I guess more methodically and well thought out. And especially like with something in quantum where it's so new and everyone's trying to get like be one step ahead, when things like get slowed down by like bureaucracy and stuff, it feels a lot more frustrating. But again, it's like there's a reason for this, right? The reason as to why it is functioning the way that it is to prevent issues in the future that maybe I would not. Again, I'm not super experienced in the realm of businesses and stuff that I wouldn't like be able to foresee like that far into the future. Alrighty. Next question is, if your house was on fire, which three objects would you save?
So this question unfortunately hits close to home. Not that I experienced a fire, thank goodness, but my neighbors, unfortunately, in the building that was next to mine, was actually on fire. It was a three-alarm fire. And so when I saw that happen, I had a conversation with myself about, well, this could be possible. If the winds were blowing the other way that day, it's very possible that the building I was in would have been on fire and I would have had to move out and have been displaced. So my answer is very practical. I have a go bag. Basically, it is a bag that's filled with the toiletries, or would be, the necessities of if I stayed somewhere, obviously the papers I'd have. And then, of course, my wallet and my cell phone, right? So that would be the practical decision or, response to that. Um, and I'm sure that the intent behind the question is kind of like, what are the three things that are most important to you? But it's myself, my wife, and our well-being. So it's kind of, unfortunately, it's one of those conversations in today's world where, wildfires in the West resonates with me to hear and see this kind of question and know that people have been displaced. And it's not just wildfires. We're talking about flooding, across the South and Southwest, and then talking about hurricanes and disasters. And so it's a serious question. And to the extent that people plan ahead, prepare, um, and part of that even goes back to that science fiction reading. There are definitely lots of books that talk about disasters, and there's a book called Unthinkable, where it definitely puts those questions at the forefront of your brain, and you're like, oh my goodness, what would happen? What would that look like? Where would I go? Who could I rely on? Who could I call? How would you pay for things, right? So yeah, it's definitely a good question, and it definitely makes you think. And in a world where we rely so much on technology, what happens when technology is not there for you?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons we had selected this question was to think about like what are the bare necessities that you would need if everything were to disappear? Like how important is technology? How important is material goods in these types of scenarios? And I remember like the first time I've seen this question, I was just like, I really would grab my snow globes. There's no reason behind them. It's just like that's the thing that I think about of like, oh, this is like really precious to me for some reason. And so I just was curious about what other people would say. And so, but it was I think the answer was very practical. Like I think I have a go back to like my backpack has everything that I could possibly need in it, and I bring that everywhere with me. So I'm like, if in case I get trapped in a car or in the middle of the woods, I have everything I need in here. Uh,
Yeah, no,
recently,
no, I see that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Recently, I was like, I should get an emergency blanket just to carry around in this bag. I think when you get down to it, it's a very deep and philosophical question that I think, again, recently with all of the natural disasters and everything that's happening, people are definitely thinking more about. Sorry, it wasn't meant to be so sad.
Well, like you said, this is a very serious question, but to the extent that someone approaches it, is it something that's very precious to you? Is it something that's very practical? Um, it gives you a sense of their personality as well. And so, um, yeah, if you were to ask the question, what are the three non-essential things you would take with you in a fire? That could be an interesting way to position it, and that would definitely give you some different answers. And then I think of myself and what I would take, and trying to like, I don't think there's anything that's that precious to me. I used to be, a collector of different things, and also a photographer and an artist. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I might take one of my favorite paintings, or I might take something, that I had taken a picture of that I, really loved, or a notebook that had a lot of cool notes in it, but just fun ideas. So, yeah, it's one of those questions that, depending on how it's asked, what the intention of it is. But yeah, it's we're living in a world where there's a lot of volatility, a lot of chaos, and unfortunately, there are lots of natural disasters, emergencies, and things happening that one has to have that in the forefront of their mind and have a plan of action.
Moving into the final question. If you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and why?
Yeah. So, here, this is more of me being also kind of practical, but also I'm just a temperate, moderate kind of weather person. And so, the Mediterranean with, the access to the Mediterranean Sea, the seafood. So, whether it's Greece, Turkey, Italy, parts of Spain, parts of France, any of that, region would be where I'd want to travel. And most likely also because you could visit a lot of different places and spaces and islands. Food is a bigger factor as well in culture. And so having access to seafood and different spices and Turkish coffee and Turkish tea and, all things like that. So, yes, definitely checking out, North Africa as well on the other side, being able to maybe even do the entire thing would be kind of neat.
How much time do you think you would like kind of spend in this area?
I'm someone who likes to get into the culture. I'm not like a resort person or someone who wants to stay at one of those beachy places. I want to kind of be immersed in the culture and the community. And so at least a week in each region, and, stay somewhere off grid where you're closer to the people who live there, kind of watch and experience life as they have it, to be able to shop or go fishing or what have you. So it's like you're living among them, and understanding the world that they're seeing and being part of. Also, because there's something to be said about not being catered to. I'm not one for pampering. I really want to feel what other people are experiencing and seeing and how they're living their lives and appreciating it, because it's easy to lose perspective and to be so grateful for all that we do have in our current day to day, and to see how other people may have it better or different, or how they, um, part of it is also the innovation, for me is you learn from seeing so many people do things differently. And you're like, why do they do it that way? What is it that led them to, creating that sort of device? Or why do they have these events on these activities? So it just helps my brain to also that neuroplasticity of having to rewire it and test it and try something different and see something that I didn't expect to see and hear people engage in, not just culturally and linguistically, but also their mannerisms and nonverbal communication. So you don't normally get that when you're in an area where it's heavily trafficked with lots of tourists and people there for marketing and branding and tourism purposes. But when you're somewhere where hopefully more authentic to the community and the people who live there, you see things that you don't expect to see, and you learn things that hopefully make the human experience that much more enriching. Um, because I don't know everything. I don't know all that is, and I don't understand everything that is why it is. But to see other people, and be part of, for a little bit their life, that's kind of neat.
I feel like this is such a good wraparound to technically what you're like, this is portion of your career and what you do, and like bringing people together. And to bring people together, you have to really understand their backgrounds and everything that they've gone through. And so it kind of really ties in with your answers. I feel like there's a central themes here now. But thank you so, so much for willing to do this interview with me. Is there anything that you need us to highlight at all, or any events that are coming up?
So the thing that I am a big proponent of is, I've been working on this for many, many years. Launched this back in 2018. It's called the University of Maryland's Innovation Gateway. So just a nice little plug for www.innovate.umd.edu. if you are an innovator, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're just someone interested in that world, check out the website. Lots of resources, especially for the University of Maryland community, the local Prince George's County, and of course the state of Maryland. But there are resources dedicated to quantum, to social innovation. There are stories about founders. There are news articles about all that's happening at the University of Maryland under the community news. And if you're just someone who likes to explore and see cool design, it's also a really cool website in terms of navigation and functionality in UX UI. So yeah, I would definitely plug that website. And in terms of events, the annual Maryland Day, April 25th, the last Saturday of April, University of Maryland open house. So if you are in the community, stop by the campus. Parking is free. It is a big deal not to have to pay for parking at the university. So come to campus, bring your family, enjoy all that's happening. Hopefully, it's a nice sunny day. But even if it isn't, there'll be a lot of great things for you and your family to do.
Alrighty, thank you so, so much. Have
Thank
a
you,
great
Winnie.
rest of your day.
You too. Bye.